وشلومو ديما الكل تقدر حوزي تحرست أيضا فيسبوك لايف حيويث وبلكي دعوبر أركي عمينا تشيكا ديما موزبنا أيضا دا تحرس يوثهم بعديلا بسبب ضيف أيضا لاتيو أركي بأوروبا بعماري قايو وكبعينا أبعينا وزبنا دا تسمينا يتحرستو القرآن هو تكتيو مساعد لجاني موقعستي ترجمة إذا نعوم ليدن قدوة ديما بلشونو إنجليشويو موقع قبانة قلبنا لو إنجليشويو. So welcome everybody back to our Unity Forum. Today we have non-regular timing for our session. The reason is our guest is in the US and we wanted to accommodate its schedule, of course, for that. And actually today we are going to look at one of the most urgent and overlooked situations or stories in the Middle East, which is the fate of the Syria's Christian communities and the after the or fall of Bashar al-Assad. So Christian, as many people know, of course, once made up about 10% of more than 20 million of the population of the country. So after more than a decade of war, ISIS terror, displacement, and now a volatile political transition under interim President Ahmad Al-Shaara, many church leaders warn that the community is approaching a collapse. One bishop even recently said the church is in Syria is dying. So to help understand what is happening right now, politically, culturally, and on the ground, we are joined by Richard Ghazal, Executive Director of In Defense of Christians, a leading advocacy group for human rights and minority protection in Syria. Richard, thank you for being with us today. Shano Ebo.
تودي لي زمينو ثو حاول أبراهام ميقود أبراهام عبد المسيح شقونه فسحنو غلبة توينو عمي خواد يوما.
Todi, Shano Ebo. So to begin with, how would you describe the general situation of Christians in Syria today, both of course inside the country and across the diaspora?
Well, the situation is very grim, as I'm sure you understand. The situation that began unfolding just about a year ago in November, December of 2024, with the fall of the former government led by Bashar al-Assad and the Assad family for about 50 years. Certainly during that 50-year period of the regime, the former regime, there was plenty of reason for concern for minorities, specifically Christians and other ethnic and religious minorities. Now that the fall of the government has occurred last year, over the last year, it's only confirmed our fears of what was to follow. As we've seen, we've observed the Islamist government led by Ahmad Al-Shaara take control. He has morphed his one-time Al-Qaeda affiliated HTS group into now a de facto interim government. The only difference is they've changed banners, they've changed their clothing attire, but the ideology remains the same. As we've observed over the last number of months, most recently in the United States with President Trump, we've seen interim President Shaara make outward signals and overtures to the Western governments of the world, specifically the United States, to signal his moderation, essentially as a means of putting the guard down of the Western international community. And this concerns us most greatly because as this is occurring, as this PR offensive is occurring, Christians in Syria specifically are very fearful, very anxious for what the future looks like. And this is not projection. This is based on reality. This is based on what they're observing every day and going through everyday attacks and kidnappings and so forth. So it's a very concerning situation right now.
Yeah, we will come into more details later. So we want to start to draw a general picture. So we often hear, of course, that Christians in Syria have a foot in the past and one foot in the survival mode. Would you agree with that?
I'm sorry, you broke up with the question there. Once more.
We often hear that Christians in Syria have one foot in the past, their legacy, and one foot in the survival mode, and actually looking to leave the country.
That's absolutely
Would
correct.
you agree
When
with
the
that?
I absolutely agree with that. The fact that they have one foot in the past is a very interesting and very accurate description because some still live with the nostalgia of the Assad government because for all its sins and for all of its failures, they did protect Christians in some nominal sense. So you have many who are still nostalgic for those days. You have others who are jubilant and ecstatic and almost drunk on celebration for the fall of the government, which again had many merits. But the anxiety is shared across the board, no matter how you fall on the issue. People are moving to the diaspora, and those who stay in Syria do not stay because they wish to stay. They stay because they do not have the means to leave.
Okay, then you would probably also agree with Jack Murat's Archbishop Jack Murat's recently statement, who was actually captured by ISIS. So he has speaking from experience, saying that the church in Syria is dying.
That's the grim reality. We don't like to face this fact, but this is the grim reality. Of course, we're doing everything we can on the ground. Our religious leaders from across the board in Syria are doing what they can to stay buoyant, to stay alive, essentially, to preserve their community. But at the end, how much of this effort is in the long term gonna bear fruits? In the West, we see it happening before our eyes. We see more people joining us in the diaspora. This is not a good thing. It's good on an individual level that they seek safety and that they're able to secure a safe future for their children. But what does that mean for the future of the church in Syria? I agree completely with the assessment of Archbishop Jacques Murad.
Yeah, the political transition, you already touched to that, of course, after Assad, with the former HDS leader now serving as interim president, is really unprecedented in the history. How has the shift so far affected the daily life of Christians? What do you think? What is your assessment?
Well, right now, I think he's using Christians in much of the same way that Bashar al-Assad and his father Hafiz also used Christians. What we see today, we see President Shara using Christians as a PR tool, as a political prop for this political theater that he's trying to put on. Um, I think Christians understand this very well, but I don't think they're gonna raise their head and make an argument because if it's securing their future for now, and I stress for now, then they're willing to accept that. But the fact is, once this president achieves his goal, secures power, consolidates power, using the Christians as his banner of pluralism that he shows the world. Once he completes that, what is the fate of the Christians after?
Mm. So many Christians of course describe or have fear under the new authorities. This is what we notice, of course, from many communication and interactions. So what are the specific fear you are hearing and how widespread are they?
Well, it's very widespread. Unlike other religious minority communities, Christians are spread throughout the country. The Druze are focused in the south in Sueda, Alawites are focused around the coast, but Christians are not focused in any one place. We're in all metropolitan areas, so we get reports from all of these metropolitan areas, including the Northeast. So it's very widespread. Now, specifically, we hear reports of not just massacres like we saw in the Mar Elias church in June of this year, but we hear even isolated incidents happening along the coast, kidnappings, murders of businessmen, Christian businessmen. I mentioned kidnappings, the torching of churches, destruction of homes. Some of them are perpetrated by individuals, by rogue actors, by common criminals. But others, in the more concerning ones, they're all concerning, but the most concerning ones are coming from organized groups, whether under the control of the government or not under the control of the government, because you have some who are rogue, but you also have some that are local authorities that officially, in theory, report to the government. And this is the most concerning of all.
Major new field report. I'm not certain if your organization or yourself are familiar with documents over a dozen attacks on churches, cemeteries, and Christian neighborhoods since December 2024. The report, with the title Protecting Syria's Religious and Ethnic Minorities, the Need for Urgent Action, published by the Syriac Strategic Research Center, warns of a sharp rise of violence, discrimination against Christians across Syria since the fall of Bashar al-Assad in December. So according to the report, the collapse of central authority created a power vacuum that empowered extremist groups and militias, resulting in widespread sectarian violence and a climate of fear and impunity. Churches, cemeteries, and religious symbols have been vandalized, roast, burned, and Christian districts subjected to coercive religious rules. So while perpetrators are often unknown, evidence points to jihadist cells, local militias, and even some authorities. Groups like Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, now in Syria de facto government, have sometimes issued apologies but provided no real accountability. So how accurately does this reflect what your network or organization are observing in Syria?
It's a very accurate report in that regard, yes. As mentioned before, you have violence against Christians and minorities happening at several levels, as the report pointed out. It happens at the individual level, but also at the organized level at the very top, local authorities and otherwise. The most concerning part that you mentioned in your summary there of the report is the culture of impunity that the government, the transitional government, is bolstering, because they come out with verbal expressions of not accepting such violence, apologies and so forth, acknowledgments. But when they remain verbal and only symbolic, that's the big concern, because the message is loud and clear to these groups who are perpetrating these attacks that we will condemn it, but we will not do anything about it. We will not hold you accountable. In this culture of impunity is really the driving force of violence against Christians in Egypt, the driving force of Christians in Iraq, both in under the central government in Baghdad as well as even in the north. It's this culture of impunity that enables it. It's not the government forces directly necessarily doing it, but oftentimes it serves possibly as a cover for such atrocities to be allowed by the government. Now, the biggest thing that a government, any government, needs to be measured by, specifically a transitional government, a temporary government, they should be measured by how well they're able to control forces, organizations or rogue individual forces within their borders. If they're incompetent or unwilling to do such thing, to enforce such accountability, then they've proven their worth as a government, and we must not ignore this fact.
Yeah, when authorities apologize after the attacks, but nobody is held accountable. So what is the message actually sent then to Christian communities?
The message that they're sending to the Christian communities by not acting or not taking, not having accountability, is that you are not a priority. We are using you to secure our credibility as a government. We're using you to show the world that we are acceptable in an international community of nations. But we don't care about Christians in any real practical sense. You're disposable. In a couple of years, when we no longer need you, then whatever happens, happens. If you're taken out by jihadists, fine. If you migrate to the diaspora, fine. Even better, we can form a homogenous Islamic state, which is exactly the objective of them eventually. And I think the biggest point here to underscore is the fact that this guy, Ahmed Al-Shaara, he's not a stupid man. He's a very smart man. Okay? His intentions are questionable, but he's a very intelligent person who learns from the lessons of history. He observed the failures of ISIS. He observed the failures of Al-Qaeda. He observed the failures of the Taliban. Although the Taliban is still in power, that's a different story. But he is willing to and able to learn from the lessons of history and incorporate them and integrate them in how he governs, because he doesn't want to suffer the same fate as many Islamic movements before him.
Yeah, in addition, of course, the report addresses property confiscation. I think there have been reports that the followers of HTS who didn't have Syrian citizenship, they are now basically incorporated into the citizen system, and they need land and so confiscation is partially happening. Then extortion, displaced family are unable to return to their homes, and these problems are growing. Do you see them isolated abuses, or is it part of a systemic pattern in the country?
I think it's by design. You have many of these people who you mentioned are coming from all places in the world, Chechnya, Dagestan, Uzbekistan, uh, jihadists looking for a cause. And Syria was the opportunity. Syria was the vacuum for jihadists to come. And now that they're there, they've been fighting there for several years as mercenaries, as fighters for hire. They're given Syrian citizenship. They need to be treated, according to them and according to government officials, as Syrian citizens, just the same. So are they prioritizing them over the Christians or other minorities who have been in Syria for thousands of years? This is what we see today. And to answer your question, yeah, no, I don't think this is an accident. I think this is by design, and certainly plays to their benefit for their ultimate goal.
Thank you. Let's turn maybe to the October 25 elections a little bit, because the president directly appoints 70 members of the parliament. Critics say the assembly cannot can truly check execution power. So how does this imbalance shape minority rights from your perspective?
Well, in addition to the one-third of parliamentary seats that were reserved for presidential appointment, it's also important to note that not a single Alawite is a member of parliament there, and only one and only a single Christian woman is a member of parliament there. And of course, again, this is by design. This is a way of preserving control of the party who won the revolution, HTS specifically. This new transitional government, transitional constitution is, again, it's a front. It's to show the world we are playing by the rules. We're playing by Western standards. But they stacked the deck, as we say in English. They stacked the deck. They're playing the game, but they stacked the deck in their favor, such that they're appointing parliament. They've designed their constitution, which, by the way, states specifically that Syrian law is to be based in Islamic law. So they didn't say this is Sharia law, but they said it's based in Islamic law. You know, in the West, in the United States, when we hear Sharia, we immediately get defensive and we get frightened. But they were careful not to use that word. They just simply said it's based in Islamic jurisprudence, which is the same thing. The president of Syria can only be Muslim, and this has always been the case, even under Assad family. So all of these signals point to the fact that there's really no honest effort on the part of the transitional government to truly make it a pluralistic society. These are all outward signals.
Right. So our church leaders often repeat the phrase equal citizenship. Even Patriarch BarAbraham, the Syriac Orthodox Church Patriarch, in practical terms, what would equal citizenship look like for Christians?
Well, equal citizenship would look like a constitution and body of law that is designed not under religious motivation, that's irrespective and blind to the faith of the citizen, that affords them the same rights and opportunities as all other citizens, that does not confer second-class status for religious minorities. It is one that would allow the presidency, even the presidency, to be within the reach of any Christian who seeks the presidency. Now, let's be honest here. In a country of 1%, 2% Christians, a Christian will never achieve the presidency. We understand this. But just having law that allows and makes accessible the presidency to any citizen is such an important element to bear in mind, because it's a bellwether. It's a litmus test of what the society is. So yeah, no, Syria is not an equal society. It's not a pluralistic society whatsoever. It almost has shifted the lines along which the persecution and discrimination takes place. So, to give you an example of this, under the Assad family, there was religious freedom, and you could argue even religious equality to some extent. But there was ethnic oppression, right? You're not able to express your ethnic identity, your linguistic identity, even call it national identity in some sense. That was under the Bashar regime. Under the current regime, the transitional government, in theory, there is ethnic freedom. In theory, there is linguistic freedom. But the problem is now it's flipped. The religious oppression, that is now the question. So we've traded one master for another master, but I don't know that we're doing any better in the long run.
Yeah, you touched already upon the constitution, the temporary constitution from March 25 and October direct elections introduced, of course, a new legislative structure. So, and I had a sense that you already replied, but do Christians believe that this process offers a chance for political inclusion?
Well, I mean, from what we've seen thus far, it really hasn't manifested in that way. Like I said, there's one Christian woman who is a member of parliament. Um, I haven't had a sense to really gauge how much freedom to operate and express her constituency she actually has. This is remains to be seen, and this is a very important question because if she is parroting the party line, if she's just repeating, mirroring the party line, then I don't see any benefit or utility in having even a single Christian in parliament. But if, as we see as things unfold, if we see that she is free to express the concerns of her community without repression or without reprisal, then that will be a very telling, promising proposition if this is what we see.
Yeah, you mentioned one. I read at least that there are two seats in the 140 elected positions for Christians, and minorities as a whole, of course, remained, as you indicated, underrepresented. Yet, from a human right point of view, what reforms would be necessary to ensure meaningful and symbolic Christian participation and representation in the political system? So, what would your organization would suggest, or what is proposing?
Politics is only as good, and political representation is only as good as the sentiment or the feeling, perception of freedom to express one's opinions and wants and desires. So having members of parliament, even having 20 members of parliament, right, for a very small community that represents 1 or 2%, even having 20% of parliament, in theory, doesn't mean a thing unless there's freedom of expression and freedom from fear and of reprisal. So this is really what it comes down to, because appointing someone from a minority community, at the end of the day, it serves the purposes of the ruling party, of the ruling class, because it, of course, bolsters their narrative. But we need to see the results. This is what we're waiting for.
So, as reported, the Constitutional Committee will soon be beginning drafting a permanent constitution. So, what specific guarantees religious freedom, anti-discrimination, equal citizenship, of course, must be enshrined to protect Christians for sure. So, formulated differently, are there constitutional guarantees that, from U.S. perspective, are urged to be written explicitly in the permanent constitution? Is the U.S. really pushing for some guarantees?
Yeah, well, the U.S. has been pushing. They've been in talks with the government, most specifically with the president last week, 2 weeks ago. I'm not sure how specific in terms of constitutional language has been discussed. I would tend to believe they haven't spoken about specific constitutional provisions. But one thing that I'm focused on when we see a new constitution is looking closely at the language, because oftentimes Islamist governments, specifically the government led by Ahmed Al-Shaara, could be particularly insidious or sneaky and smart on how they word things, right? Because if they put in the Constitution something like minorities will be protected, right? In the West, Western observers hear the word protection and they're happy, oh, they're going to protect the minorities. But we who are familiar with um, Islamic thought, Islamic worldview, and theology, I suppose, understand the word protection in Islam means something very different than protection in the West. In the West, when we talk about protection, we talk about human rights, right? We talk about protecting people's dignity and human rights. In Islam, when they talk about protection, they're talking about second-class citizenship and dhimmitude and paying a tax for protection. So we talk about being a subject, right? This is what we're. So the Constitution may use sneaky words like protection. This is something we have to really be careful about and be sure to raise our voices when we see these sort of things, because there must be no difference. There must be equal citizenship under the law in Syria.
Yeah, the interim president Al-Shaara visited, of course, recently at the UN. He spoke there, and he visited the White House for the second time. He met with President Trump. So not only the US, but also other countries are pushing to normalize a relation and roll back the sanctions, of course, Syria. From a human rights perspective, what are the risks of legitimization or legitimizing the new government too quickly?
Mm. Yeah, this is a huge risk because I'm not arguing that they should be kept isolated. Syria should not be kept isolated because isolation of a regime like this will only cause it to become more radical. We understand this. It'll fill a vacuum, and that vacuum will be filled by radical actors. So I think the Western community of nations, including the United States and the Europe and the West, should accept and invite Syria into the fold. But to do it unconditionally and to do it too quickly, that's where the risk is presented. The meeting that he had last week or the week before with President Trump, I found very unique because most meetings in the White House President Trump has with foreign heads of state are attended to the media, open to the media, and it's done in public view. This one was very different in that it was done behind closed doors. The media was invited in and cameras only after the meeting concluded, and they're exchanging pleasantries and thanking each other and a very friendly exchange. My suspicion, my belief, is that behind the closed doors, there were conditions placed. There was tough talk because while the world is tired of endless wars in the Middle East, we want peace, we want stability, we want this to happen. It's almost like wishful thinking. But I think President Trump approached it in a slightly different way where he doesn't want Syria to fall apart on his watch. Because one thing President Trump is, he's very concerned with his resume. He's very concerned with his legacy. So I think he was careful about this point. In the United States Congress, there is annual legislation being in the final stages of being passed. That one element, it's the annual defense bill, authorization bill, appropriation, excuse me. And one of the things in this bill is, of course, the lifting of the Caesar sanctions. Now, one thing that Congress was careful to do is they put conditions on lifting of the Caesar sanctions and restoration of full diplomatic relations. So I was very pleased to see that. And my suspicion, my belief is that President Trump essentially used that same language when speaking with Shutout a couple of weeks ago in the White House. So that was promising.
Good to hear. I am sure you are aware about the initiative that more than 80 US Christian leaders recently urged the Trump administration to raise the issue of massacres on minority rights when Shaara visited the White House. So what concrete steps should the US, European Union, or the UN be taking right now in that direction?
I think they all need to show, whether it's the United States or the EU, European nations, need to show a consistent voice, a united front. We may have differences. Europe and the United States may have internal and external different, but I think in this case here, the fate of Syria affects us all in many ways because an unstable Syria means an unstable region, and that affects even the West. So I think they need to have a united front. They need to all come together and say, we welcome Syria, we want to welcome Syria, but this is essentially in Syria's hands to determine the next step. Here are their conditions. Here's what we expect of you, and here's what you must fulfill in order to be a welcome partner of us in the West.
Okay, so we are approaching the end of our short interview, but when you look 5 or 10 years ahead, what scenarios do you see for the future of Christians in Syria? So what factors will determine whether communities stay or continue leaving?
You know, this is always the final question, and then a conversation like this, and it's a very sad question to even reflect about because, like we talked about Archbishop Murad's commentary just a moment ago, I fear that that is true, and I fear that that could be the eventual result in not very long, maybe in the next decade or so. I hope this is not true. I hope I'm wrong. I hope Archbishop Murad is wrong. But if things stay on this trajectory, that is likely going to be the outcome. You may have a few who remain, again, not because they want to, but because they don't have the means to go anywhere. Um, I hope things change. I hope the West, the United States, gets tough. I hope they motivate action by this new government. I hope this new government proves me wrong. I've never hoped to be wrong more in my life, but apart from that, it doesn't look too promising.
So finally, despite all the suffering, of course, what is there anything that gives you hope right now?
Um, what gives me hope is sort of the consciousness of the diaspora. Believe it or not, this is um, sort of an unorthodox way to look at it. I think this conflict in Syria, not just of the last 15 years, but even in the last year, when we've seen things change so dramatically, I think the diaspora has almost become more aware of what's happening. And not just
Mm.
what's happening, but also the gravity and the existential nature of what's happening. I think it's probably piqued the interest of some young people who who have a lot of promise and who have a lot of potential, but thus far have been sort of inactive. Um, if the diaspora grows significantly, as I expect it will over the next number of years, this gives us more opportunity, maybe in the diaspora, to preserve our heritage, our identity, our language, our nation, because just as if I'm sure you know, of course you know the history of Qamishli. Qamishli was founded 100 years ago in the wake of a disaster, in the wake of a tragedy we call Saiful, and the folks who settled in Qamishli, which by some measure could be considered at the time maybe a diaspora. They settled there and they established schools, they established national organizations, political entities, arts, journalism, and so forth. And it turned into a beautiful, beautiful story of resilience and promise. And as grim as today's situation is, the best I can imagine, the best I can hope for, is such an awakening in the diaspora, many, many more thousands of miles away. So this is something I that the very thin silver lining in this very dark cloud.
Last time we had a conversation was about June, July, I guess, and we touched upon, let me say, an opportunity that your organization might be able to organize a Christian conference in the Congress or in the Senate. Uh, is there anything specific that you could report us today?
Well, we're hoping to do something similar to what you've described next September, actually. We hope to invite many people from our community internationally, not just in the United States. For several years, in the last 10 or so years, we've had similar conferences in the United States, mostly for those who are living in the United States and citizens of the US. But next September, we're hoping to host a similar conference open to a much broader audience and broader participation. So we hope to keep you posted. Please stay tuned, and we will provide details hopefully midway through next year.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. I am almost done with my question. I would like to give you the final, let me say, sum up. I don't know if Adnan has any specific question, who is, of course, our administrator here.
Yeah,
Adnan, do you have
Yusuf,
any
yeah,
question?
I sent you
Sure,
via
maybe.
what I sent you via WhatsApp a question of in English, Yusuf Bahti. It's a very good question.
Let me see. And
It's
sorry,
two
yeah.
questions in one question. And,
Just a moment. Just a moment, yeah. It's from our friend Joseph Bahti.
Bahti,
Shlomo,
yeah.
Richard, and Abdulmesih. Recently, in an interview with journalist Ambari Zaman, Tom Barak said that he does not support a federal model of government in Syria. In your opinion, so the question is to you, Richard, is this the official position of the American government regarding Syria's future, or can we still expect the possibility of federal regions with autonomous administration? And finally, what would be more beneficially for us, Syria in Syria, a strong central government or a federal system in Syria? This is
It's
one
a
of
great
our
question.
watch on Facebook. Yeah.
It's a great question. This is a conversation in Washington, D.C. The U.S. government has not taken an official position on it. In fact, the express position of the U.S. government right now is to support the central government and make that successful and throw its support behind them. Now, as I mentioned, there is a conversation in D.C. happening among many policy think tanks and policy circles about federalism. And most conferences I've attended by minorities and members of government and so forth, have all been very supportive of the idea of federalism. I see the merits of federalism, no doubt about it. My personal impression or my personal opinion about federalism in Syria is that it could present a disaster, and here's why. As I mentioned briefly earlier, other minorities in Syria are localized and centralized in their regions. So the Alawites are in the coastal region, the Druze are in the south by Sueda, and the Sunnis are obviously across the country. They're not minorities, they're a majority. Christians are spread throughout the country. We are not a majority anywhere. We are a minority everywhere. We are very thinly distributed. So federalism would not benefit a community that's thinly distributed all over the country unless we were focused in one central area. For us, it would make us more vulnerable to attacks in these local areas. Now, if the Christians were all focused in the Alawite areas or all the Druze areas, that may be a different situation. But the Christians, for example, in Homs, the Christians in Aleppo, the Christians in Hasakeh, the Christians in Damascus even, would be very much vulnerable to Sunni majorities. So the idea of federalism, in theory, on paper, may look good, but for me, my impression is for Christians, it would be a very different story.
Thank you for the reply. Again, concluding summary, maybe from your side.
Well, thank you. Again, thank you for this invitation. It's an important conversation, and unfortunately, it's not one that's always optimistic. But at the end of the day, as mentioned before, we know what our requests and demands of Western governments are, whether it's Europe or whether it's the United States. But my biggest message really is sort of the last conversation we talked about is what we need to do as a diaspora community. I work in my daily work. I observe the work of Greeks, Armenians, Jews, ethnicities of all sorts, Middle East and not from the Middle East, and I see a cohesiveness. I see motivation. I see unity. And I love the fact that this is called a unity forum because this is very important. This is what we're lacking. We're lacking unity. We have it here and in other places where I see wonderful work being done, but we need to take the example of our Armenian counterparts, Greeks and so forth, because they have a very specific mission and they're all fully behind the mission. They can have differences of opinions. We have Republicans, we have Democrats. But at the end of the day, we need to really come together, hold hands, and as one of my favorite songs, Habib Musa, Rush min Shantho, we have to take the message of this song, Rush min Shantho wahzi britho, and come together and hold hands and make a difference for our community, for our heritage, for our culture, for our nation, even if it has to come from the diaspora.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you for your remark on this song. And I would like to thank you again for your time with short notice to be able to attend our session. And I hope we will meet again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
شينا ابو فوش بشلومو
تودي فوش بشلوم.
Sorry.